Japan looks familiar until you step into the places no one talks about. What if some of its most unforgettable locations aren't famous, but hidden on purpose? Because the places you're about to see don't feel like destinations. They feel like secrets. A village inside a volcano. A silent island that used to be overcrowded. Forests that don't feel real. And once you see them, you'll start wondering why they were never meant to be found. Aogashima Island. It doesn't look real. And that's the first problem. Because Aogashima isn't just remote, it's isolated in a way that feels intentional. A volcanic island sitting far off Tokyo's coast, where reaching it depends entirely on weather that often says no. And when you finally get there, the layout doesn't make sense at first glance. A village inside a crater, surrounded by another crater. It feels layered, almost constructed, like nature repeated itself by mistake. But it didn't. People actually live here, quietly, with routines built around unpredictability. There are no crowds, no noise, just open land, geothermal steam rising from the ground, and a silence that feels too complete. At night, that silence deepens. The sky becomes overwhelming, filled with stars that don't flicker through pollution, but burn clearly, steadily. And that's when it shifts, because it stops feeling like travel and starts feeling like distance from everything familiar. The kind of place that doesn't welcome visitors. It simply allows them briefly. And the longer you stay, the more you notice something subtle. Not fear. Not danger. Just the awareness that you're somewhere most people will never reach. Not because they can't, but because they won't try hard enough to get there. Ouchijuku. At first it feels like a set. Too perfect. Too still. A long street lined with thatched roof houses, untouched by modern design. Untouched by urgency. But then you realize something uncomfortable. This isn't preserved for display. It's still alive. Uchijuku exists in a way that resists time. No towering buildings, no flashing lights, just structures that look exactly as they did centuries ago, and that consistency creates a strange effect. You stop tracking time the way you normally would. Walking through it feels slower, quieter, almost controlled. Even small details stand out. The way smoke rises from rooftops, the way footsteps echo slightly longer than expected. And then there's the experience that seems almost symbolic. You eating soba noodles, not with chopsticks, but with a leek. It sounds unusual, but once you try it, it feels deliberate, like the place is guiding you into its rhythm. And in winter, when snow covers everything, it becomes something else entirely. Sound disappears. Movement softens. The entire village looks suspended, like it's waiting for something that never arrives. And that's the part that stays with you. Because Uchijuku doesn't try to impress. It doesn't change to match the present. It simply continues, exactly as it always has. And stepping into it doesn't feel like visiting history. It feels like temporarily leaving your own. Nachi Falls. You hear it before you see it. Not as background noise, but as something constant, unavoidable. The sound of water falling from a height that doesn't feel natural. And when it finally comes into view, it doesn't feel like a landscape. It feels like presence. Nachi Falls isn't just a waterfall. It's something that has been treated with reverence for centuries. And standing there, you understand why. The scale is overwhelming, but it's not just the height. It's the way everything around it seems to adjust. The air feels heavier. The mist doesn't drift, it settles. And just beside it, a pagoda rises in sharp contrast, red against green, structured against something completely uncontrolled. It creates a visual that feels almost staged, but isn't. And that tension between order and nature becomes the experience itself. People don't rush here. They slow down. They watch longer than expected. because something about it holds attention without asking for it. And the longer you stay, so the more the sound begins to dominate. Conversations fade, thoughts become quieter, until eventually it feels less like you're observing the waterfall, and more like it's surrounding you. Not aggressively, just completely. And when you leave, that sound doesn't disappear immediately. It lingers, as if part of the place doesn't fully let go. Torii sand dunes. It shouldn't exist here. That's the first thought that doesn't go away, because Japan isn't supposed to look like this. Vast stretches of sand rising and falling like waves, with the ocean sitting just beyond them, as if two different environments collided and never separated. Walking onto the dunes feels disorienting. The ground shifts slightly with every step. The distance becomes harder to judge, and suddenly the scale starts to expand. What looked manageable from afar becomes something much larger when you're inside it. There's no clear path, no defined direction, just movement across something constantly reshaping itself, and that creates a quiet tension. Because even though it's open, it doesn't feel entirely comfortable. The wind changes the surface. Footprints disappear faster than expected, and the more you move, the less stable everything feels. Some people try sandboarding. Others ride camels across the dunes, adding to the surreal nature of the place. But even with those experiences, there's something underneath it. A sense that this landscape doesn't belong, and yet it does. And as the sun begins to lower, shadows stretch across the sand in ways that distort perception even further. It stops feeling like a location. It starts feeling like a contradiction. One that doesn't resolve, but stays with you long after you leave. Shirakami Sanchi. There's no clear entrance, no dramatic reveal, just a gradual shift into something older than anything around it. Shirakami Sanchi doesn't announce itself. It absorbs you. A vast forest of ancient beech trees untouched in ways that feel almost impossible in the modern world. And that's what makes it different. It hasn't been shaped for visitors. It hasn't been adjusted for comfort. It exists on its own terms. Walking deeper into it, the environment changes subtly. Light filters through the trees in uneven patterns. Sound becomes inconsistent, sometimes present, sometimes completely gone. And that inconsistency creates a quiet unease, not fear, just awareness. Because there's no distraction here, no artificial noise, just the natural rhythm of something that has existed far longer than you. Waterfalls appear without warning, trails feel less defined the further you go, and at times it feels like you're not following a path, but being guided by the terrain itself. That's what makes Shirakami Sanchi different from other natural sites. It doesn't present itself, it reveals itself slowly, and not completely. There are areas that remain difficult to access, intentionally left that way, preserved not for tourism but for continuity. And standing within it, that becomes clear. This isn't a place designed to be explored fully. It's a place that allows you in, but only to a certain point. Gunkanjima, Hashima Island. From a distance, it looks solid, structured, almost functional. But the closer you get, the illusion begins to break. Gunkanjima isn't just abandoned. It's frozen at the exact moment everything stopped. Once one of the most densely populated places on Earth, this island held thousands of people within its concrete walls. Now, it holds nothing. Buildings stand intact, but empty. Windows open to nothing. Hallways lead nowhere. And that's where the tension builds, because it doesn't look destroyed. It looks paused. Walking through it feels controlled at first. Guided paths, restricted access. But even within those limits, the environment feels unstable. Not physically, but atmospherically. There's no movement, no sound beyond the wind and the ocean pressing against the edges. And that silence feels heavier than expected. Because you can see the structure of life everywhere. Rooms, staircases, rooftops, but none of it is active. It's all residue. And the longer you observe, the more it begins to feel like something was removed too quickly, not gradually, suddenly. That's what stays with you. Not the ruins, but the absence. The sense that this place didn't fade out. It stopped. And everything left behind is still waiting for something that never returned. Iya Valley. You don't arrive here easily. And that difficulty feels intentional. Iya Valley sits deep within the mountains of Shikoku, hidden in a way that makes it feel separate from the rest of Japan. Roads narrow, turns become sharper, and the further you go, the more it feels like you're leaving something behind. But once you're inside, the environment changes completely. Steep cliffs rise on both sides, rivers cut through the valley below, and suspended between them are vine bridges that don't feel entirely stable, even now. Originally built as a defense mechanism, these bridges could be cut quickly to prevent pursuit, and even today, walking across them carries that same tension. Each step feels deliberate, the structure shifts slightly under your weight, and for a moment, you become fully aware of where you are, above a drop that doesn't allow mistakes, but that's only part of it. The valley itself feels quiet in a way that isn't empty. It's contained. Villages are scattered, almost hidden within the terrain, and nothing feels rushed. Time moves differently here, not slower, just less pressured. And that absence of urgency creates a different kind of awareness. You notice more. You think less about what's next. And by the time you leave, the contrast becomes clear. Because returning to normal environments feels louder, faster, less controlled. And Iya Valley doesn't follow you. It simply stays exactly where it is. Koyasan, Mount Koya. You don't visit Koyasan the way you visit other places. You adjust to it. A sacred mountain that doesn't present itself as a destination, but as a system. Temples aren't just structures. They're active spaces where routines have been repeated for centuries. And when you stay overnight, you don't observe that system. You enter it. Meals are quiet, deliberate, prepared with precision but without excess. Mornings begin early with chants that don't feel performed. They feel continuous, as if they never stopped. And that continuity creates something subtle. A shift in awareness. Because everything here follows a rhythm that doesn't depend on you, and the deeper you go, the more noticeable that becomes. Especially at Okinawa Cemetery. A path lined with thousands of lanterns and graves extending further than expected, covered in moss, partially hidden, but never neglected. Walking through it at night changes the experience completely. Light becomes minimal, sound becomes distant, and the environment feels suspended between presence and absence. Not unsettling, but deeply still. And that stillness doesn't break. It continues regardless of who enters. That's what makes Koyasan different. It doesn't react, it doesn't adapt, it simply exists in a way that remains unchanged. And for a moment, you align with it, before returning to something that feels noticeably different. Yakushima Island. It doesn't feel natural, and that's not criticism. It's confusion. Because Yakushima looks like something imagined before it looks real. Dense forests covered in moss, and trees twisted into shapes that don't follow predictable patterns. And then there are the cedars. Ancient, massive, existing for thousands of years. Some older than recorded history. And standing near them, scale becomes difficult to process. Not because they're tall, but because they feel established in a way that doesn't relate to time the way you understand it. Fog moves through the forest without warning, changing visibility within minutes. Paths appear and disappear, and that constant shift creates a sense of instability. Not dangerous, but unfamiliar. You don't move quickly here. You adjust constantly. And the deeper you go, the more the environment begins to feel active. Not physically, but atmospherically, like it's responding in ways that aren't obvious. That's why it inspired fictional worlds, because it doesn't feel grounded in reality the way most places do. It feels like something else layered over it. And when you leave, that impression doesn't fully disappear, because Yakushima doesn't present itself clearly. It leaves part of itself unexplained. And that's what makes it difficult to define and impossible to forget. Zhao Fox Village. It looks controlled until you realize it isn't completely. Zhao Fox Village is often described simply: hundreds of foxes roaming freely within a designated area. But that description doesn't capture the experience, because you're not observing from a distance. You're inside it, walking through an environment where animals move without fixed patterns, without predictable behavior. And that creates a subtle tension. Not fear, but awareness. Because every movement matters. Every step changes how close you are to something that isn't fully domesticated. In winter, the entire landscape shifts again. Snow covers everything, softening sound, slowing the movement. And against that white background, foxes move quietly, almost blending into the environment. It looks calm, controlled. But it isn't entirely either. There are rules here, guidelines for interaction. But they don't remove unpredictability. They just manage it. And that's what makes the experience different. It doesn't feel staged. It feels permitted. Like you've entered a space that functions independently of you. And for a moment, you're part of it, but not in control of it. And that distinction stays with you, because once you leave, the contrast becomes clear. Most experiences are designed. This one isn't, at least not completely. And that's what makes it impossible to forget. You've seen the Japan most people never reach, but the real question is, which one stayed with you the longest? Because these places aren't just destinations. They change how you see everything after. And there are still more hidden across Japan. So if you want the next list, darker, stranger, and even more unknown, subscribe now, before you miss what comes next.